The US government wants to open more than 1 billion acres of ocean to offshore oil drilling. That decision can threaten beaches, fisheries, tourism jobs, and coastal communities across California, Alaska, and the Gulf of Mexico. In this episode, Surfrider's Pete Stauffer explains why this plan is so dangerous, who really benefits, and how everyday people can still stop it. We're going to talk about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, marine biologist and science communicator, here to tell you what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. On today's episode, we're going to focus on a major federal proposal that could reshape America's coastlines for decades. The Trump administration has released a new offshore oil and gas drilling plan that would expand leases across vast areas of the U.S. ocean, including regions that were previously protected. How are they doing this? I have no idea. Is it right? I have no idea. We're going to find out today. To help us understand what is at stake, I'm joined by Peter Stauffer, National Ocean Protection Manager at the Surfrider Foundation. Surfrider is a grassroots organization with chapters and volunteers across the U.S. and beyond. And for over 40 years, they have been protecting oceans, waves, and beaches from threats just like this one. Pete works directly on offshore drilling policy and has spent more than 20 years inside Surfrider, starting as a volunteer and rising through the organization. In this conversation, we talk about why offshore drilling is an existential threat, how it affects coastal economies and communities, and why this issue is not partisan, and what listeners can do right now to speak up and protect the ocean they depend on. This is going to be a great interview. I can't wait for you to listen. So here's the interview with Peter Stauffer from the Surfrider Foundation. Enjoy the interview, and I will talk to you after. Hey, Pete, welcome to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about this new oil and gas plan in the U.S., this drilling plan, as well as Surfrider's position on it?
I'm ready. Thanks so much for having me, Andrew.
You bet. I'm super excited for this because we've had on at this point I've recorded and I've posted Oceana's recording with this interview about this plan. I'm doing the same thing with you because I wanted to get Surfrider's perspective on this, because it's good to get everybody's perspective. And I know Surfrider, Oceana have worked together before. We're going to have other people on as well to talk more about this plan, but I want to get everybody's perspective because Surfrider has this unique positioning within sort of the ocean conservation world, in that it's a grassroots organization, has a lot of people on the ground all over the U.S., even in Canada and other places. And you guys have been able to accomplish so much with the staff, as well as the army of people that you have to, speak up and speak out against stuff that's happening, not only to prevent beautiful surfing spots from being ruined, but also just to protect this lovely ocean that we have. So really appreciate you coming on the podcast to give Surfrider's position on this oil and gas plan. I think it's very important to hear everybody's perspective and what they can do. So before we get into all that though, Pete, why don't you just let us know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. My name is Pete Stauffer. I'm the National Ocean Protection Manager for Surfrider Foundation. So I lead Surfrider's national campaigns to protect the ocean. So right now, a huge amount of effort focused on stopping new offshore drilling.
That's great. There's been a lot of stuff. We're going to focus on this offshore drilling plan, but there's been a lot of stuff that we are speaking up against and speaking out against, right? There's deep sea mining, there's oil and gas, there's like the EPA problems that are going, and just, NOAA funding being cut, and a lot of people being thinking, how is everybody at Surfrider? It's a lot of work. You're working in overdrive. How is everybody doing there?
Yeah, well, you're right. It has been a really challenging time under the current federal administration, but Surfrider is great. We're a volunteer-based organization, and we are so lucky to have incredible chapters, incredible student clubs, and a lot of what Surfrider does is programs, beach cleanups, water testing. We work on local projects, everything from protecting and restoring our beaches to making sure there's good public access. So
yeah.
I think that's kind of the magic and the stoke that bring people to Surfrider. I've been with Surfrider for over 20 years, and
Wow.
I started as a volunteer. Then I became a chapter leader, then a regional manager. And so I'm sort of the classic example of someone who's kind of worked their way up. But that's what I've always loved about the organization is just that grassroots muscle. And when we do have these federal threats, that's the real power of being able to unite our chapter network and our clubs across the country, working with partners like Oceana and many others to try and stop bad things from happening to our ocean.
I completely agree. You've been with Surfrider for over 20 years, which is amazing. In that time, there have been some ups and downs. As you mentioned, there's federal threats right now. You've had federal threats before, probably had state threats, and across, like, things are so dynamic across the U.S. It's so different, culture and everything like that goes on. Whoever's the governor at the time or whatever the states are doing at the time, even from a municipal level. What has helped you, what parts, like you seem like you've done a lot of different parts within Surfrider. What do you find like people really cling to during these tougher times that are volunteering or working within the sort of the Surfrider umbrella? Because the assumption here is people like the hands-on stuff they're doing, like the beach cleanups or, something, that's more hands-on that you do. Is that what helps, or are there other things that help as well?
Yeah, I think, at Surfrider, it is very much about place. And, when I was younger, I moved around a bit, and it was always so fun to be able to move to a new place, go to a Surfrider chapter meeting, and just knowing that you would meet great people and you could have a way not just to get involved with conservation work, but to actually be part of a community. So I think that's a big part of the appeal of wanting to work on something that feels a little more tangible. But I think the other thing is being part of something that's bigger, this national network, the international affiliates, because with issues facing our ocean and our environment, it can get really depressing. And so as one person, you can think, well, what difference can I make? But if you're plugging into a national campaign, or you're getting your hands sandy, restoring the beach, it all kind of, adds to that feeling of you're really doing something and it matters.
And when people come on, I know there's like an onboarding process when people come on as a volunteer. You guys provide videos, online videos and things like that. And everybody does their own thing within their chapters to help people, stay atop of the issues and then what you can do. For people who are listening to this who want to do something, especially during a time like this, where they're seeing a lot of federal cuts and a lot of proposals for drilling and for deep sea mining and stuff, what do you recommend, especially with your experience, what do you recommend they do, to help speak up and help, speak out against these things?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. One, of course, getting involved in whether it's Surfrider or another organization, because they can help you make a difference on the things that you care about. And the other thing is just communicating with your elected officials. And it's so important, whether it's city council, state legislator, your representatives in Congress. We live in a democracy, and it's their job to listen to their constituents. So that is so important too.
And that can come in the form of like emails, phone calls, tweets, or X's, or whatever you call them now, or any way of communicating them. So you can send them, information that you want, evidence-based information is what I meant to say, and then what I always tell people too, and I'm sure this goes a long way with Surfriders, is the stories. Tell the stories of why you love that specific place. If you're a surfer, why have you been surfing there for 30 years or for 10 years or for 15 years, or if you're a fisher, why you've been fishing this? Because I think it's important to tell those stories because we connect over those stories. Is that something that Surfrider encourages?
Oh, exactly. And especially with elected officials, we love to invite them to our beach cleanups, to water testing events, to show them that the place is not just the environment and the wildlife, but show them, how business is and their constituents. really depend on a clean coastal environment. So,
Absolutely.
and we're nonpartisan. We believe that, it shouldn't be some sort of political stance one way or the other to want to protect our public resources. So, that's our goal is to build
Yeah.
that broad support and do it from the bottom up.
Absolutely. And everybody should love the ocean, right? I know not everybody loves the ocean, but we all should, love the ocean. Doesn't matter on political spectrum, cultural, professional, wherever you're from in the world, we all need the ocean. So we should all, protect it as much as possible. Obviously, that's how you and I feel. Don't want to speak for you, but I'm sure that's how you feel as well.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that's the way I see it. This is great. No, before we get into the offshore plan, I have one more question because I know a lot of people will be kicking me and screaming and being like, Andrew, you got to ask how people can work for Surfrider. Like based on your experience, I know you talked about but how did you, like, what was your background when you first volunteered with the organization, and did the organization inspire you to do more schooling, or how did that all work out?
Yeah, no, great question. I get it all the time too. I began as a volunteer with Surfrider, so that's certainly one way to, gain relevant experience and show your interest
Yeah.
in being part of the organization. In my case, I work for the environmental department within Surfrider, so I have a science and a policy background.
Hmm.
So before actually getting hired by Surfrider, I was working for NOAA, which is the lead federal
Oh,
agency
interesting.
for managing the ocean. So I think from their standpoint, they probably saw my grassroots and volunteer
Yeah.
background, but also the academic background and professional experience, working within ocean management. So I think that was a helpful background. But, we have, people who work in our marketing team, communications, doing grassroots training and things like that. So it
Hmm.
really depends on the type of position that you'd be seeking.
I love it. Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Let's get into this offshore oil and gas drilling plan. Can you just tell us, like, give us an overview of what that plan entails, where it plans to do leases and so forth?
Sure. Yeah. So 3 weeks ago, the Trump administration released their offshore drilling federal proposal. So this is something the federal government does every 5 years. They create a new offshore drilling plan. In this case, they're doing it sooner than that because they didn't like the Biden plan.
Mm.
But the Trump administration plan, it's really alarming. Proposes over 1.2 billion acres of ocean for oil and gas development, and that includes multiple regions throughout the country. So the
Right.
entire California coast, most of the Gulf of Mexico, including the central and western Gulf, but also a large portion of the eastern Gulf off Florida that was previously protected. And then the Alaska and Arctic waters, hundreds of millions of acres of waters pretty much around the entire state of Alaska, including the high Arctic, which is incredibly sensitive. So massive, unprecedented proposal. No public meetings on this, but there is a public comment period that's open until January 23rd. So we're doing everything that we can to get the word out and to get people to get their comments on the record.
Amazing. I mean, this is something that is, as you said, is quite alarming. How did it differ from the offshore plan for the Biden administration? There obviously an increase, but by how much? Like, what was the Biden plan doing compared to what this Trump administration plans to do?
Yeah, so the Biden plan that was finalized just a couple years ago, it limits new leasing to just the central and western Gulf.
Okay.
So it still is a significant amount of new offshore drilling, but compared to what the Trump administration is looking to do, really a fraction of the impact. The other thing is before President Biden left office, he used his authority under the executive powers of the president to permanently protect the Atlantic coast, the Pacific coast, and the Eastern Gulf from new drilling. And so those protections should still be in place. But when President Trump came into office, he issued an executive order and essentially announced that he was revoking those protections, even though there's nothing under federal law that says he can do that.
But that's my next question.
Yeah. So there have been multiple lawsuits filed. So this will continue to play out within the courts. But, for all intents and purposes, those protections are not there right now because they have been revoked. And we have a federal agency that's proposing huge amounts of drilling in many of those areas.
So when Biden put in those protections, because I remember Obama did that as well up in the North Slope, right, in Alaska. Yeah. He put in these protections. He did, and I remember him doing it. I remember it saying that he did it through Congress to protect it, so that you couldn't use an executive order to take it away. Is that what, like, for this one, did the Biden administration, like, did President Biden use an executive order to protect these areas that you mentioned, the Eastern Gulf, the Atlantic, I believe it was the California coast, for those protections? And that's why that, Trump thinks that he can use an executive order to take those away? Or was it more solidified than that?
Yeah, what President Biden did, he used his authority under federal law. So it was more than just an executive order.
Okay.
So there's a federal law called the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act.
Right.
Basically provides the framework for how the federal government determines where and if new offshore drilling will occur.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a section under that law that says, and it's very succinct language, but it says, essentially that the president can withdraw temporarily or permanently certain areas of the Outer Continental Shelf from future oil and gas leasing. That's all it says. It doesn't say anything else about a future president being able to reverse those protections. But essentially, the argument that's being debated in the courts, for all the non-lawyers, and I'm not a lawyer either, but it's this debate of, well, did the law really intend for this to be used at that scale? Which, from our standpoint, is sort of an arbitrary determination. We're going off what the language of the law says.
Yeah.
And it's also probably worth noting that offshore drilling is broadly unpopular across the United States. This is particularly true on the Atlantic coast, the Pacific coast, the Eastern Gulf. We'll get to this in a second, but we're seeing this play out in real time in terms of the Trump administration's proposal. But in short, the Trump administration revoked those protections that were highly popular and were advocated for by communities for decades. And now his administration is looking to expand over 1 billion acres of ocean for new offshore drilling.
Interesting. And of course, we know that this is not just about energy, because he's canceled a lot of the ongoing activities and proposals for renewable energy on offshore, like on the Atlantic coast. I don't know if there's anything else on the Pacific, but I know he's canceled a lot of that stuff that was going on because he just didn't think it was right. He doesn't like windmills. We all know he doesn't like windmills, and the administration doesn't like them. So it's not an energy thing, because we know that if they had continued with this official plan and renewables, at least they could have a case that they're trying to increase energy. This is more about oil and gas drilling, because they think that's the way forward. They think that's the future of this administration. So I find that really interesting when, you cancel. It's not just about energy. So you're taking away other alternative energy, which could become mainstream energy the way it was being built up. And a lot of regulations were going into place for that as part of I believe it was was it the Inflations Act under Biden that these projects were going?
Yeah, the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
And also the bipartisan infrastructure law. So between those two federal laws, a huge federal investment in solar and wind and energy efficiency. And it's been just a shame to see the current administration and Congress try and reverse all those things. but to what you were saying, one, we're turning our back on renewable energy, which is not a finite resource and
Right.
doesn't contribute to climate change. But the U.S. is already energy independent. I mean, we're at record levels of oil and gas production. We've been a net oil exporter for the last 5 years. So, yeah, none of this really is needed. And it's basically just revealing a bias towards more and more oil and gas leasing at the expense of our public lands and waters.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a really good point to make. Now, Surfrider calls offshore drilling an existential threat.
Yeah.
What does that mean in practical terms to you guys?
Yeah, I mean, almost any way that you look at it, and you think about the beaches and our coastlines and our communities and how woven that is, right? Whether it's quality of life or environmental health or our coastal economies. Offshore drilling threatens all those things. It threatens wildlife. It threatens, the condition of our marine ecosystems. It threatens public health with terrible air pollution. And it contributes to climate change, which, we're already losing our beaches. We're already, seeing the impacts around the globe with just unbelievable, heat and drought and extreme weather. It's putting billions of people in harm's way. So for all these different things and whatever time scale you're looking at, it really is, like we said, an existential threat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting too is I think when a lot of us think about offshore drilling, we think of these oil platforms, right? These oil and gas platforms. You see a lot in the Gulf of Mexico. I used to work in the Gulf of Mexico for like 8 months, and I used to see that there's like a city of platforms that you see in the eastern Gulf of Mexico,
Yeah.
and then you see them on a little bit on the west coast, definitely up in Alaska when the drilling was happening in quite a bit of abundance back then. But when you see them, you don't see the risk that they take. You see sometimes the fire burning, and you see the smoke billowing from the sort of the working that like a working platform. But you don't, when people think about that, I don't think a lot of people think about the risk that could happen to those coastal communities, whether they can see it from the coast or whether they can't. We really don't I don't think we really understand as people. Even myself, when I look at that, it's the first thing I think of. Is that I don't think of what would happen if an oil spill would happen and it would come up on the shores until we see like these big oil spills that happened. Exxon
Yeah.
Valdez happened in the 80s. I think it was the 80s. Then, of course, BP oil spill happened. I'm sure there were a number of spills between that. And then, of course, there was the Santa Barbara spill in 2015. And then the one of 4 years ago just off of Orange County. Why don't we don't think of those things when we, like, communities, when we hear about offshore drilling. A lot of times they're out of the sight of eye from the coastline. But
Yeah.
what do you think it is about these offshore drills that pose that threat? Because, like, really each and every one of them can spill in a number of different ways, in a number of different amounts. Let's just say
Yep.
sometimes you may not see it, sometimes you will see it. But, like, recently off the California coast, we saw two that really reached, the coastline. And
Yep.
and they really affected it. It really brought it home that these things can leak. What do we not know about the oil and gas industry in terms of leaks, other than these, the four major spills that I mentioned here? I'm sure there were some other ones that I missed, but what is
Yeah.
it that the public doesn't know about these types of, like, that, about this happening? Does it happen more often than not than we think?
Yeah, I mean, oil spills happen all the time. The smaller ones tend to be underreported by the industry and not covered by the media. The larger ones can be catastrophic, not
Hmm.
just for the environment, but for communities, for businesses. Um, yeah, maybe there's a recency bias that people have, but I
Yeah.
can tell you, as someone that lives in Orange County, that people remember the spill.
Right.
We just had a big people's hearing event in Costa Mesa, and we had over 100 people turn up, including local officials who remember the challenges of dealing with Amplify Energy, and their lack of forthrightness, their failure to turn off the spigot, if you will, while oil continued to flow into the marine environment. We had a woman who owns a charter fishing business and whale watching company out of Dana Point. She came and spoke out about it, and then emailed me the next day to let me know that she'd submitted her own official letter to the federal government. So, yeah, when you see this stuff happen, it's hard to forget.
Yeah.
The Orange County spill, that was 25,000 gallons, which is actually on the small end of what could have been much worse. And the weather conditions could have been worse in terms of bringing the oil to shore. But, we still had our beaches closed for 10 days. Our fisheries were closed for a few months. Horrible impacts to the hotels and businesses, restaurants. The official cleanup lasted over 3 months. And, great response, again, by local agencies and trained cleanup workers and volunteers. But, yeah, just a real mess. And, this is part of doing business for, the oil and gas industry in terms of offshore.
Well, I think it's interesting how it's like one industry can affect so many other stakeholders. And what I mean by stakeholders for our audience members is, the fishing community, the tourism community, the whale watching community, the restaurants, the people who, beach goers. And I mean, like, let's be honest, California coast probably has a highest percentage of beach goers. It's known for their beaches. It's known for that activity. It's a very important aspect to their, to just life, in California and certain spots around the world. And that's, I think, some of the things that we don't think about. And for me, it was the BP oil spill where I really started to see, because I lived in certain, like in Louisiana, southern Louisiana at the time, or right before that, where I started to realize how many people that I met there that it was going to affect. And I think that's just something that we don't think as citizens, as people, like in North America, around the world, when we see these oil spills, is who it's going to affect, not just right then and there for an hour, for a day, for a couple of weeks, but for months and years down the road. Like BP oil spill, which was a huge catastrophe, probably one of the worst spills in the U.S., if not the worst, it's still affecting people. Like it's still, and the dispersants that they use is even, we now know it's even worse. It's just they're not to clean up the oil, but it's just there to literally disperse the oil so you don't see it. It sinks the oil to the ocean floor. So I think that's one thing that we just don't get as a people, is that when these things happen, they affect the people local to where it happened for such a long period of time, even to the point where this spill that you're talking about in Orange County happened 4 years ago, having a people's hearing 4 years after, and people can still remember it. People can still say, like, what's going on here? Like, why we're thinking about doing this again? We're thinking about doing this more, and coming out in droves to speak out, which is fantastic. And I think it's great that Surfrider has that connection with the people to help them amplify their message. When you see people being affected like this, like what role does Surfrider play? Because you guys are so community driven, what role do you guys play as an organization in helping people who are being affected by that Orange County oil spill? Like, what role did you play from a Surfrider perspective, or roles, I guess?
I mean, it was really interesting because within 12, 18 hours of this spill happening, we got just inundated with hundreds of people saying, I want to help. I want to, in some cases donate, which was great. But in more cases saying, I want to do something. I want to be part of the cleanup. And what made it really tricky is that oil is toxic. It's highly hazardous to human health. But what we were able to do was develop a smartphone app to allow volunteers to actually contribute to the cleanup without picking up the oil. And so the way it worked is, the response area, it's basically from Los Angeles all the way down to the San Diego border, which is over days and weeks and ultimately months on end depending on ocean conditions, you would continually get fresh deposits of tar balls and oil on the beach in different locations. And you had, as part of the unified command and the official cleanup, you had these, trained cleanup teams in hazmat suits picking up the oil. The really great thing about having the smartphone app is we had, hundreds and hundreds of people using the app who were just going to the beach, sort of, either look for oil or maybe just part of their daily routine, because that's their local beach. And when they would spot oil, they take a photograph of the oil. It automatically would upload not just the photo, but the date, the time, and the location. So this would go into a crowdsourced map to unified command. And then they were able to sort of take that information real time and say, okay, let's deploy our team to, north of Huntington Beach tomorrow. Or, oh, it looks like, we're getting more deposits down by Oceanside. So it was great to be able to contribute to the cleanup, but also give people something they could do without putting their health in jeopardy by trying to clean it up with their bare hands.
It's genius. Again, it's the power of the people and just putting a device and a device that everybody has and utilizing it for something that could really help. And like you said, not put them in harm's way, because it could be very toxic. It's not an easy thing to deal with. It's very hazardous. It's like hazardous material, essentially. I think it's interesting when we, again, talking about oil, how does like these spills and just oil in general, how does it affect the sort of the long-term planning of, the beach access and recreation along, for California, along the West Coast, along the Gulf Coast, and even up in Alaska for different reasons. But how does that affect that planning and for those sort of areas?
Yeah, I mean, offshore drilling can impact beach access in a variety of ways. One, of course, would be oil spills, right?
Yeah.
Where you have beaches get closed.
Get closed, like you mentioned, yeah.
Other ways just from the industrialization of the shoreline. And so it's not in every community, but it's in someone's community. And, where you have pipelines and refineries and petrochemical facilities and air pollution, that doesn't lend itself to either public beach use or all the economic and social benefits of that. And then, we of course have climate change. And so our beaches are getting squeezed right now with rising seas. And, particularly in places like California, you have increasing coastal development pressure. And so the beaches have nowhere to go.
Right.
So, yeah, part of that long-term solution is to stop pumping more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, try and restore our beaches, give them the opportunity to migrate inland if they need, and use those nature-based solutions.
Yeah. And I'm speaking of that with climate change. You look up in Alaska, obviously they're really feeling the effects of climate change, probably more so than many other communities in North America, especially from an indigenous perspective. I know in Canada, the indigenous nations are feeling it as well. I've seen videos of people complaining that the permafrost is like the amount of flooding they get just from the permafrost, because it's melting into their homes on a daily basis is ridiculous. I can just imagine what the coastline's looking at and then to add, offshore drilling as an extra. It seems like it's not helping those communities in one bit. Does Surfrider have a presence up in Alaska in terms of chapters and working with indigenous people up there?
Yeah, we have a small but mighty chapter in Alaska on the Kenai Peninsula.
Nice.
So, we don't have a ton going on up there, but we did just have, within Surfrider, these regional drilling strategy calls to talk about the Gulf, talk about California, and then also to talk about Alaska and the Arctic. And so we do have a much stronger presence in Seattle and Washington State. And so we are doing outreach with the Port of Seattle and the fishing fleets there, because they are very much dependent on healthy marine ecosystems for their fisheries. So they're not a fan of this.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
And I have done some interviews, some media, stuff up in Alaska as well. But I mean, in the case of Alaska, it's, talk about the worst place to drill for oil. I mean, you have extreme weather, you have, storm activity, some of the most difficult conditions to try and respond to an oil spill. And then you have, these highly sensitive, particularly as you go up to the high Arctic, just unbelievable. Marine
it's not. Yeah,
and,
it's horrible. Like it could be a horrible environment to work in. The water's below 0 centigrade a lot of the time. There's ice you have to deal with. There's freezing cold winds. The wave action obviously is very difficult. Going back to, I mentioned the Obama administration put in some restrictions in drilling along, I believe it was that north slope. Is that what's called the north slope, right?
Well, it was actually the Beaufort and Chukchi Seas.
Right.
So I know on Anwar on land there, was protections put in place too. But
so how can those plans be put in place if they're not allowed? And I remember that rule or that law was pretty strict in terms of who and what can be done in terms of drilling in that area. How can they propose offshore drilling when there was already a law in place that would ban it from happening?
Well, there's ongoing litigation to try and determine that. So that's my first answer as a non-lawyer. But right now, in terms of the current federal proposal, they are in their draft plan looking at oil and gas leasing in those areas, including the Beaufort and Chukchi Sea.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how they keep proposing these spots where there is already legislation, as we mentioned before, and from Obama, the Biden administration, where they said you can't, and they're still putting in plans to get there. I guess they just hope that people don't take them to court and they don't fight it, and they can just continue to do it, even though at this point it's considered illegal. It'll be interesting to see what happens with those court proceedings. Typically, how long do those types of court proceedings go on for? Like, will this be a decision I know it was only released like 3 weeks ago. Yeah. Is this like something that'll take years, do you think, to litigate? Or, I know you're not a lawyer, so I don't want to give you, I know this is not like professional, but like just in your experience, do these take a long time to litigate, and can that delay the process?
Yeah, I mean, we expect these cases to play out over a number of years. So particularly the legal challenges that relate to the Trump administration revoking the Biden protections. So, and the way I would characterize it is, this legal work and the litigation, it's fundamental. It's so foundational to do everything that we can in this effort to lean on our existing federal laws and policies. But at the same time, I don't think there's any quick fix here. So, we have our legal department, and we have, a number of other groups that are working closely together on these legal strategies. But it's certainly, at least in the short and midterm, it is not a replacement for the public involvement and the community advocacy that is really, I think, our best chance to protect our coasts.
Absolutely. A lot of times the argument for oil and drilling for oil is it brings in jobs, right? That's something that is a big thing. It's like, we're going to bring in local jobs. People can go work there. It's great. But there are other stakeholders along the coastlines that provide more jobs. So something like in the Gulf, you have tourism and fishing employ more people than oil in the Gulf, which is saying something because there's a lot of oil that goes off in the Gulf. So why do you think there's always that argument of like oil provides jobs, But why are those jobs more important than the jobs, knowing that what an oil spill can do, especially in the Gulf, why are those typically, prioritized over jobs of fishing and tourism and all these other different things that can happen along the coastline?
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you why the federal administration would prioritize that, but I mean, I think that's why offshore drilling is so unpopular because
Yeah.
whatever region you're looking at, from the Florida Gulf to Alaska's fisheries to California's beach economy, it doesn't pencil out. It's like, why would you put at risk hundreds of billions of dollars of economic revenue from recreation, from tourism, from fishing, all the visits, the trip related expenditures of why people live and visit our nation's coastlines, in so many ways are connected to a clean coastal environment. So,
Right.
yeah, the promise of saying, well, we're going to add some jobs, it's like, well, how many jobs are you going to put at risk,
Yeah.
and communities and ways of life really for, the people who live in that region.
I think that's a strong narrative and argument against oil and gas. I really do.
Yeah.
I don't find that I hear it enough to make that argument because, everybody's worried about the economy. It seems like the economy always takes over the environment, unfortunately, even though those go hand in hand a lot of the times when we talk about tourism and so forth. But I find a lot of the times, the economy, like that argument for the economy should be really uplifting in terms of even marketing from a nonprofit, being like, if you work in an area that demands a clean coastline, you do not want oil and gas to happen. And I feel like it kind of shows the disconnect that this administration has with the people. As you mentioned, people are very not many people are for oil drilling. And it doesn't matter. This is a bipartisan issue in terms of the people, but it seems as though the people representing them are really staunch on promoting this. So this is one of those things where when, science communicators like myself, when people are trying to speak out, scientists, conservationists, people who love the ocean, this is not a partisan issue, right? This is a environmental issue. This is a people issue, and if we focus on that instead of the political side of it, in your experience, do you find there's more success in turning that tide?
Yeah, I think that's very well said. And to what you were talking about in terms of showcasing that business opposition, Surfrider has a Sign the Surfboard project that is ongoing on different coasts, where basically it's a surfboard that is traveling south to north, and it's getting signed by coastal businesses. So by restaurant owners, by surf shop owners, by chambers of commerce. And we actually did this project during the first Trump administration. We still have the surfboard in our headquarters. It's covered with signatures from all these business owners. We took the surfboard to Washington, D.C. We paraded it around to members of Congress. It was small enough you could fit through the x-ray machines to get into Congress. And then we met with the Trump administration. We organized a business roundtable and had executives from the outdoor industry, from the surf industry, from chambers of commerce in North Carolina, and had a good discussion, both with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the Department of Interior. And for those who remember, during the first Trump administration, they were trying to do the same thing, open up virtually all U.S. coasts to offshore drilling. And they ended up just sort of abandoning the plan. They never got around to finishing it. So there was no big announcement. But I think, this was really the success that came from communities speaking out. The Sign the Surfboard project was just one piece of that. The bigger pieces were the hundreds of local government resolutions that got passed, or elevating tens of thousands of businesses through these business alliances of saying they don't want this. and really, building that bipartisan opposition from the local level up to the point where, I wasn't part of those meetings behind closed doors with the Trump administration, but you can only assume they just did a political calculation and said, no one wants this, including, other members of our party. So let's work on something else. So the silver lining with this is there is a pathway to victory if we build a movement that's big enough, if we spread the word and we get not just environmental groups, but businesses, local electeds, state representatives speaking out about this. We can win this. I do believe it.
I believe it as well. I think you really hit the nail on the head too, but really focusing on the local aspect too, because if you think about it, there is this sort of like this vastness and this feeling of I can't control the federal government because it's so overarching, and we know this administration has a lot of power, more than other administrations, and so there's a worry there. There's this feeling of this, like, it's just like, okay, like, I guess this is what's going to happen. Oh my gosh, like, we could be depressed about it, or we could do something about it. And I love that, again, and this is why I love having Surfrider on, and why I love having people like yourself on, Pete, because you talk about not just as an individual speaking up and doing the public commenting, but also start talking to local officials, right? And they pass, regulations and resolutions to not have oil in their municipalities, in their cities, in their counties. And then that goes up, and then they start to see, like, the federal government starts to see the barriers just piling up and up and up. And, like, they'd be stuck in litigation probably for the rest, for like 30 years down the road if they really wanted to try and overpower everybody. They just can't, because the mechanism's in place. And I think, again, that's another thing that doesn't, and when we talk about what we can do, it doesn't get talked about unless you're maybe part of the Surfrider organization, the volunteer network, because this is like what you guys have been doing all this time, and why you and the partners and collaborators have been so effective in stopping these things from happening, or slowing them down, or making people think, or making people have to go to court, because you're just like, we will do everything we can as long as we have the power of the people, and the people are speaking out in what they want, not of what they've been told they want, but what they actually want. That makes a difference, I feel like. I think that makes a huge, huge difference. So focusing on the local, building up those resolutions within municipal government, talking to councilors, talking to county members, whatever that structure might be, and wherever you live, is going to be super important. And that's something that you actually have that's what I love about it. You have a direct influence on, because, like, a lot of, like, I know my city councilor. I know her. I interact with her. We see her all the time, like, out and around in the town that we live in, the city that we live in. And some people may have access and some people may not, but that's the power of democracy. That's the power of what you can do in the US and from outside. I think we're seeing it with deep sea mining, and I think we're going to see it with oil and gas in this plan. So I love that aspect. So to give one last thing to people, like one last strategy to people, or one last sort of like encouragement to people, the people who are listening here who may have felt just exasperated by everything that's happening, what is the advice that you give them, and that Surfrider gives them, to encourage them to continue the fight, to continue to act for a better ocean?
Well, I think it's important to know what you're fighting for. If you're always just fighting against something, I think that's hard to sustain, just mentally and physically. And so for me, I think you do have to keep the joy. And I think the reason why we get such amazing volunteers and we get so much done at Surfrider is people want to be a part of something positive. And I think, and I've been doing this for 20 years, but I'm the same way. Sometimes I just need to leave my computer and go do a beach cleanup for an hour. And it's like, it's just completely, resettles things in my head. So obviously we're facing some really, really huge challenges when it comes to our ocean, but I think, being part of a network that's doing great things locally, and then also being, in a place where you can plug in to the power of a national
Yes.
network and all the coalition partners and communities, because there is real power there, and that's how we're going to win is by continuing to grow the movement.
Absolutely. I have to admit something personal that happened to me is I joined an advocacy community online. And these are people, some people I know, some people I met through this. It was like a WhatsApp group, and it's a bunch of science communicators that get together. It's monitored and kind of like run a lot of the times, or organized by the people at Future Swell, Alex and Carissa Cabrera.
Yeah.
Wonderful. You probably know them. You probably worked with them before. And it made me feel, like there's multiple people doing stuff. We're collaborating to do stuff. And I feel like Surfrider is the same thing. When people get together, people are like-minded in terms of they want one thing. They come from different backgrounds, different parts of the countries. They're all over international here in Canada, and you feel that camaraderie, you feel that connection, and you feel that power of Surfrider to give you the resources to help out, to do something. So if people listening to this episode and be like, "Oh, no, Pete and Andrew have hit the nail on the head here. I want to be a part of this." How can they get involved with Surfrider as a volunteer?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way is just go to Surfrider Foundation, look it up online, and you can connect, of course, with our national page and plug into our Drilling is Killing campaign. So
Perfect.
Within seconds, you can take action and submit a comment to the federal government on this issue. But you can also find your local chapter or your local student club and get involved. And, I think one of the great things about Surfrider is as a volunteer, you can pick what you want to do. Some people want to organize events and go to city council meetings. Other people are like, no, I'm an introvert. I just want to, do a beach cleanup or help with the flyers or something like that. And so that's what's neat is you can join that community and just figure out, where is it that you want to plug in and how can you contribute?
I love this. Pete, I want to thank you so much, not only for coming on the podcast and sharing this valuable information, but also the work that you and Surfrider have been doing for the last 20 years plus. We appreciate everything that you've done, probably stuff that we don't even know about. You know what I mean? Like there's been so much you've been a part of. I want to thank you for the work that you continue to do and the work that you've done in the past, especially with Surfrider. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. Love to have you back on to talk more ocean conservation.
Well, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, real pleasure. And thanks for all you're doing to get the word out.
Thank you, Peter, for joining us on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. It was great to be able to get context on things that have happened in the past with oil and gas, especially with that oil spill that came to the shores of Orange County, California. I think it really reminisces on how much oil spills happen and how often, and we don't realize. A lot of times it doesn't come to the shore, but this just happened 4 years ago in 2021 with Orange County, and people were devastated, even to the fact that people come 4 years later to a public meeting to say, hey, we do not want offshore drilling anymore. We do not want offshore oil drilling because it is going to affect our business. It's going to affect our livelihoods. It's not just about oil and energy anymore. It's about how it affects the people of the U.S., how it affects the people that depend on the economies of the ocean. Right. And this is something that goes across the U.S. It's the common denominator around all of this is the people. And if we want to protect the people, we need to protect the ocean from offshore oil drilling. And so that was great to be able to have Pete on to talk about how it affects those communities. And I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Let me know in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you go to speakupforblue.com/feedback, you can let me know of your comments there. I would love to hear what you have to say. There's other places where you can leave comments. If you're listening on Spotify, leave a comment. We actually have comments. I'll reply to it because I check those as well. There's so many ways we can engage. This is about community building. This is about saying, hey, as a community, we can stop this stuff. We can put in public comment. We can talk to influential people that we may know in our lives. We can join Surfrider as a volunteer and work within their internal organization to be like, hey, how do we stop this? There's so many things that you can do. Work with Oceana, work with Surfrider. There's just so many things that you can do, and then just speak up for yourself. That's the greatest power that you have in a democracy. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Comments down below. Go to speakupforblue.com/feedback so you can hear your comments. I'll even publish them at some points if you're okay with it. I want to thank Pete for joining me on today's episode. I want to thank you for listening, and I want to just thank you. This is awesome. I love hearing from people. I love engaging with people. It's why I decided to do this science communication thing in the first place. And so it's just great to have you on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, from the True North Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.